what we just learned and what we just heard is a fairy tale. I like fairy tales. It was like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And then I say, okay, I'm in it. I should know what's going to happen. But anyway, so I like very much the narrative, and I think that it actually brings me to a couple of points that now I want to make. The first one, I think that it's our responsibility to honor the spirit by which this group was created, with all the difficulties and challenges. I also remember I came here as an alternate member the first time, and I say, I'm not really sure I'm in the right place because I do not really understand where this is going. Okay, it was 10 years ago, and now I can clearly see where, all the road that we did together, and much more what is ahead. So I really would like for us this to continue to be the safe harbor as it was envisioned, where everybody is free to speak. So Ulrich, you can mention whatever you want about the pricing. Then, it's another thing if we are, there is anything that is going to be done about it. This is another story. But in terms of bringing idea, discussion, even if they are controversial, this is the right place to be. And I really would like for us to keep this as a safe place to respectfully discuss everything. The other point is that, the other concept, which I think is really important, is the time. This is the time, guys. This is the time, because I have the feeling that what we bring to the table in terms of conversation, discussion, challenges, the way to solve it, it's finally been listened to. We are listened to. We are heard. Our voice are being heard, which I think is very important. What now we call nowadays like real world evidence is what I do on a daily basis. Is my clinic. Is the clinic that we have at the hospital, is the clinical trials that we designed, is what we do on a regular basis. And this is something that we need to bring back as experience in order to improve the process. We know the importance of science in our practice for our patient. We know the importance of having good data, so we really need to work all together in order to support science and innovation, and for science and innovation to reach patient, to reduce, to actually make zero the inequalities that we are facing these days in Europe, and not only Europe, and it's our responsibility to work in this group. We understood in time the importance of mixing and mingling, so talking to people that work in different environment, trying them to understand our point, try ourselves to understand a different perspective. And I think that this is again the spirit of this group, and I think that this is the point for which it's so important that we provide our feedback to improve, first of all, to see if we want it differently, the framework for interaction between academia, learned society, all the eligible society, all, I would say, healthcare professionals with regulators. If healthcare professionals are the closest to patient, this is clear. It is also clear that regulators are the closest to healthcare professionals, and we need to work in a way that we are going to close the gap and have a circular model of interaction, having early discussion, having a continuous discussion with regulators in order to develop the science and innovation that we need. There are already many topics that have been quoted, from clinical trials, the regulation, and also the very interesting workshop that we just had a few days ago, the ACT-EU. There is a lot of movement, a lot of activities in that area, a lot of activities in science, shortages, pricing and reimbursement. So a lot of topics to work on, and I really think that I'm very privileged and happy to be with you and have the opportunity to work all together on these topics and many more that we will we will individuate in order to help the best we can our patients. And I think that I will stop here with the introducing remarks. And since I talk about science, I think that this is the right time now to have actually to know where is science, technology, and medicine regulation heading to. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Anthony Humphreys, who is the head of the Regulatory Science and Innovation Task Force, and who is going to answer this very interesting question. Well, now we want answer, Anthony, so sorry about it. Anthony.
No, many thanks for that very kind introduction, and I may disappoint you at the end of the presentation, so but you can absolutely judge for yourselves. But first of all, it's a great privilege to be invited to even present to you, and indeed on such a sort of milestone, a sort of a birthday celebration, and it's really wonderful, and it's a point in time. The system is in a point of dynamic change, but I do believe that your structure and similar structures will continue into the future and play an even greater part as we go forward. So, but if I get into what I'm trying to talk today, maybe is what the agency has done with regards to innovation, what it is doing, and then where it is heading into the future. And it's very heavily impacted by the recent pharma review that the Commission just landed back end of April. And again, it's a rather it's a sort of personal perspective on that. Many other people have different perspectives, but I'm happy to share this one with you today. Can I get the next slide? Or yeah, thanks very much. Just because we are celebrating anniversaries, it's always good to look backwards as well as forwards, particularly as you get grayer in life. And I would like to have the premise that innovation is indeed in the DNA of VMA. And at the time, if you look at this is the regulation back in '93. Even people drafting it would be in the late '80s. And they thought that it was necessary to establish a centralized community authorization for technologically advanced medicinal products, in particular those derived from the EU biotech industry. So already that sort of interest in sort of advanced sort of scientific methods, particularly the biotech type processes, was already identified, well known back in the '80s. And that was the ambition, one of the main ambitions drivers then with regards to the establishment of the centralized procedure. Even though that's not explicit, and I was curious in the previous video, with the emphasis on the one label, the one SMPC, the one package leaflet, all of the things that we take for granted today, but didn't exist actually prior to some of this thinking in Europe. This was always in scope with regards to the ambition from the beginning, and there was a rather simplistic expectation, I believe, or a naive one maybe. This would result in equal access in the then European Union, even before it was subsequently enlarged. So innovation in the DNA. Next slide again, please. And you've already covered this, I think, again in the video, maybe in earlier interventions this morning. I believe all of these legislative pieces that have been added to the sort of ecosystem have been a systematic extension of this stimulation to innovation. Started with the orphans, then we had the mandatory scope extension where a lot of new active substances became available. You had the introduction of the Healthcare Professionals Working Group back in 2006, pediatric regulation, ATMP legislation, pharmacovig legislation, major investment in safety management, your own reconstitution then as a working party in 2013, and the clinical trial regulation, which took a little bit of time to get into effect only last year, simply because it was linked to a mother of all databases. But basically, you can see all of this sort of pieces of legislation, all of an extension of stimulus to innovation. And I believe both healthcare professionals as well as patients have been involved in that journey, starting with the Orphan Committee, and a number of the colleagues around the table here were intimately involved with that setup. So that's all to the good guys, yeah? Next slide again, please. And again, so innovation, the origin was there. This was just a headline figure. It looks a complicated slide. The real message here is that we recommended 89 medicines for authorization, 41 of which had a new active substance, and a sample of which then across a whole variety of therapeutic areas are outlined there. And I believe healthcare professionals and patient representatives have been instrumental with regards to that current productivity. And 2022, guys, I mean, it's incredible. 41 new active substances. We can debate the value of those new active substances in terms of what they're addressing, but it still is an amazing productivity on the back of the COVID challenge. And that seems to be a good thing in terms of potential opportunity. Next slide again, please. The other thing was with the priority medicines, and guys, you know, there was a lot of controversy about us even establishing that. We've essentially pulled it out of thin air because there is no current legal basis for that. But it was very nice to see that at least 8 medicines, approximately 10% of what we approved, and even greater of the new active substance approvals, had essentially a prime designation. So if we really want to get these priority medicines into the hands of patients, healthcare professionals, you know, this is us. We believe this is what we're achieving. The other side of it is we're very concerned with the whole evidence generation, sort of who controls that evidence generation, how it's set up. And we really believe in one of our central offerings, which is the scientific advice, but also then the pediatric investigation sort of planning that goes with it. And 78% of applicants with new active substances did receive scientific advice. And we firmly believe that results in better outcomes then for patients, better evidence for professionals to take decisions on prescribing. Next slide again, please. Okay, but that's essentially where we're at today with regards to, you know, state of the art sort of innovations. But we have a rich pipeline of topics coming through, and I noted the digital health reflection in the previous video. But genuinely, we have some of these early point of contact offerings, and these are some of the people knocking on our doors for really trying to say, how do we navigate with these type of developments in the European healthcare ecosystem? Because it's not so obvious that what we're looking at here is classical medicines, or are they sort of elements of delivering healthcare in ever more sophisticated type systems? And you can see for yourself the types of 3D bioprinting, but also biomarkers used in Alzheimer's disease, and then tying up then with both use of AI and machine learning procedures to optimize some of those approaches. So these guys are knocking on the door, and you know, we're not saying, oh, you're a medicine, come through us. We're just trying to help you with regards to how you then navigate it further downstream. Next slide again, please. Yeah, so basically what proposition I would make would be that it's a unique opportunity where we're at right now for an aligned strategic response. And I'll just, if you'll allow me, Chair, it's vital. I would propose that it's vital that research and development of innovative pharmaceuticals continues to be fostered in Europe. I think it would be somewhat of a tragedy, lost opportunity, if ever we became simply a marketplace for pharmaceuticals rather than a really vibrant ecosystem to develop them. And I can develop that in any sort of Q&A we get the chance. Evolving this ecosystem is a collaborative activity, and a critical success factor is this synergistic interplay between academia, developers, regulators, and I very much noted your comment about close to healthcare professionals and patients in that order. And I really believe what we've done in the past has been this synergistic interplay, and we need to ensure that continues on into the future. It's easy to say, guys, that the common objective is to enable patients, healthcare professionals to have timely access to innovative treatments, but we all know that today in Europe that's actually not the case. That's what the Commission are highlighting in the review. And there's no doubt COVID-19 has been a super catalyst for change in the regulatory landscape. Some of the language about healthcare provision in Europe you just wouldn't have heard pre-COVID, Frank, and I'll develop that a bit more. Next slide, please. So there's a whole bunch of very nice strategies, and don't worry, I'm not going to blow all of those up for you, like, you know, no matter how much I personally love one or more of them. But on the left, we have the sort of the regulators' engagement, the regulatory science, the network strategy. But we very much had a strong input into the Commission in their landing of the pharmaceutical strategy and the review that landed then end of April this year. On the other side, though, there are these sort of very holistic initiatives where medicines is only a small part of a healthcare delivery type approach, Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. And we also have a fantastic opportunity in Europe with the Horizon Europe funding, the strategic research and innovation agendas, you know, fostered by public-private partnerships like the Innovative Healthcare Initiative. But the focus from here on in, Chair, is on what did that pharmaceutical strategy, what has landed now end of April, and how is that going to evolve the system, in my opinion. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go back here just to point out some of the language that's been used both by the commissioner then and others. And if I can quote her here, today we present a once in a generation proposal, so that pretty much takes us back to 95, to ensure medicines are accessible, available and affordable at all times to citizens no matter where they live. I mean, pretty much that's in Europe. But they want a single market for medicines delivering for citizens, but also keeping our industry as a global leader. And that's pretty much saying it would be a very retrograde step if we don't maintain a very healthy R&D environment in Europe. On the other side, if you go across there, as well as this AAA agenda, access, affordability and availability, you also get this triple C, which is maybe a little bit more clunky. Competitiveness, that's about, a Europe competitive industry. Compliance, and particularly there we're talking about environmental risk assessment ambitions, and then combating antimicrobial resistance. But the language here is used as an EU health union, which really hasn't been there, pre-COVID to any great extent. And again, no first and second class citizens, no member states left behind. So that sort of language is really maybe a response or reflection on the last 25 years, but certainly a statement of intent that shouldn't be the pattern for the next 25 years. And the headline there, putting patients at the center. Okay, so if we break that down then a little bit more, next slide, please. So what's in it when you open up the package, and I'll focus more now on where's that taking the sort of innovation agenda as we go forward, rather than so there's an awful lot of stuff in the pharma review, but certainly in the early development support, you see essentially a reinforcement of elements that you'll be very familiar with today. So on the left-hand side there, scientific advice, but very much extended to a platform with other bodies, medical device authorities, expert panels, HTAs, payers, substance of human origin, clinical trial coordination group, etc. And within that, of course, that platform discussions, healthcare professionals and patients, but at least we get a legal basis to bring different parts of the regulatory system together. Prime itself, which, as I said, was largely pulled from the air today, is being codified in the legislation because it's seen to be a successful element in the Europe system and to give a more enhanced support for priority medicines. Something that was very controversial in COVID, certainly very helpful, was this very dynamic rolling review, but it was quite exhausting for people that were involved in it. But the idea is kept as a sort of phased review or stepped review for products that offer exceptional therapeutic advancement in areas of high unmet medical needs. And we can all have very, very interesting opinions on those elements, but at least that's the language that's used in the proposal. And then finally, this concept of a regulatory sandbox. So it's the ultimate future-proof element. If we really don't know, there's no point in having a straitjacket legislation. It's good to introduce some concept of regulatory sandbox that allows for truly novel developments with convergent technology that we don't even know of today. So essentially, that really is the opportunity to have headroom, headspace to accommodate some of these developments as and when we see them. Next slide again, please. So I just wanted to put the unmet medical need, high unmet medical need, because I can imagine that healthcare professionals and patients will have to have a big role in our interpretation in both of these areas. It's building on an initial experience largely in the orphan area, but with this proposal, the Commission have taken it into the mainstream pretty much across all therapeutic applications. There still is a further reflection in the orphan area where they go for this high unmet medical need. The baseline for orphans is unmet medical need is assumed, that's in the bottom there. But for this high unmet medical need, exceptional therapeutic advancements, there are additional incentives and rewards that are offered if people can deliver this. Next slide again, please. Yeah. Okay, and this is another incentive for innovation that the Commission have gone for, and it's to do with like intellectual property data exclusivity. And essentially, they've reset the basis by a targeted 8 years of unconditional data protection, but that can be extended by a series of depending on what your development looked like. So the idea that you do additional indications and is quite logical. People would have no problem with that. The idea that you have comparative clinical trials, it isn't always possible, we know that, but as and when it is possible, that information is particularly useful to the downstream HTA and payer communities. The idea of addressing both unmet medical need and high unmet medical need, we just previewed in the previous slide. The most controversial on this is the market launch, because the Commission have sort of said the diagnosis is we have a 2, 3, 4-speed Europe with differential access across Europe, and they're not happy just to sit back and let that be the next 25-year perspective. So they want to incentivize the industry to market launch in the 27, and if they do so, then they pick up 2 years of additional exclusivity. That's probably, from the industry perspective on the trade, the most controversial proposal. They think it's unfair because although they can knock on the door, they can't always guarantee the response. But you have to see it from a background of a 25-year current experience, and do we want to do something about that? They balance this out with pre-authorization support. The idea is if you enhance the pre-authorization support and if you go for faster authorization, then obviously then those treatments get into the hands of healthcare professionals, patients sooner. But if you don't, or if you aren't adding those additional elements of innovation or applied innovation that translate to benefit, then you will face earlier market entry of generic and biosimilar medicines. And that's essentially the balancing proposal. Next slide again, please. Okay, the other thing which they've gone for is a streamlined regulatory framework, because by building Europe over 20-25 years with a patchwork of legislation, the feeling is that there are inefficiencies within that system. So they want to sort of introduce a streamlining of this framework. Part of that streamlining is a fundamental, well, I wouldn't say fundamental, but a basic speeding up of the authorization. We currently have 210 days. They've chopped a month off that. They've also chopped some time off the commission legalization procedure, the decision procedure, and the 150 days maximum accelerated review, because COVID was a lot quicker than that, is still left there. But they do want to balance with regulatory efficiency, lower regulatory burden. That's also in the pre-development area with the proposed changes on the committee structures, etc. But also very importantly in the post-authorization area with regards to the whole system of variations. And the belief is that there is, with the world going digital and digitization representing, business to business sort of electronic transfer, there is the opportunity to use technology to achieve that. Next slide again, please. I just wanted to give a lift. It's not that you have any existential concern, Chair, I think, but the fact of the matter is that there is a beefed up representation on the CHMP, which of course then is the licensing committee with 4 members and 1 alternate, on the basis of a public call for expression of interest. It represents healthcare professionals. There's also a similar beefed up representation with regards to patient organizations, and that is then at the CHMP where most of these authorization decisions now will land. Next slide again, please. The other thing which is interesting, because I have a former CHMP member sitting on my right, and when he amongst others as well, but when they were nominated, there was no specification as to what the expertise was, at least no granularity in that specification. But part of that specification now is we're going to have a mother of all committees with regards to the spectrum of expertise, rare and pediatric diseases, advanced therapy, experience, biological and biotechnological products. And that is a sort of, that's going to be a differently composed CHMP maybe than what we have today. Next slide again, please. Okay, and then for the purposes, there is the establishment for the purpose, working groups of patients and healthcare professionals. And it also talks about the representation. I'm not saying that we didn't have that today, sort of by serendipity or by design, but it's absolutely specified now that it should include orphan, pediatric, geriatric, so all of the special subpopulation concerns, ATMPs, and indeed a broad geographical range representing, the fact that healthcare systems in Europe are diverse. And there's an ability then for the rapporteurs appointed by these committees, and this happens today in the system, but it's nice to see it explicitly written in the legislation that those contacts across the life cycle of medicines development should be maintained. And next slide again. I think it's coming to the well. I'm coming to a close, Chair. I hope I'm not going over on my time. Back on, they've introduced a number of novel types of applications and authorizations. One is platform marketing authorization. So if you look at a technology like mRNA, that can actually be seen as a platform that can be used for many different types of indications. So we have to think differently than just a singular product development. Combination pack, you might say we've already seen that, but again, it's good to get that recognition that this convergence of device and particularly diagnostics is happening. Something we probably could have used during the COVID was a temporary emergency marketing authorization. We didn't have it. We still managed quite okay, guys, but at least now we have another tool in the toolbox. Conditional MA, we've had it for years, but what's important here is that it's been extended into the post-authorization setting. So if you have a major new indication for an active, you can actually approve it conditionally, and that means that a certain group of patients can get access to that medicine under strong oversight condition even earlier. And also what's interesting as well, because when the ATMP legislation was introduced in the mid-noughties, there was a lot of tension, anxiety about whether or not it's a good thing to have a hospital exemption for ATMPs. I think the jury has come in on that, and essentially it's been supported going forward as a valid sort of provision route with greater levels of exchange. But certainly it's seen as a for n equal 1 and any small scale sort of utilization, this is a good sort of test bed, nursery bed with regards to ATMP products. Next slide again, please. Okay, so this is the concluding slide, Chair. You'll be very happy to hear that. So I don't know, have I answered where science, technology, and medicines regulation is heading to, but I think I've given a crack at where the medicines regulation response to emerging science and technology is heading to, at least, informed by the Commission's review, but that itself been informed by our own reflection on the regulatory science strategy, network strategy, etc. So building on the long experience we've had. So it's going to be very interesting. Is all of these objectives possible to be achieved? One, to attract the pharmaceutical research and development by providing a future-proof, stable legal regulatory framework and a favorably regulatory environment. I often think future-proof and stable are sort of contradictions in terms, but that's how it's expressed. To provide a more targeted incentive frameworks for innovation with a focus on patient access and addressing unmet medical needs. That absolutely is a strong pillar of this proposal. And, you can debate the pros and cons of whether that's good or not, but honestly, it is a strong attempt from the Commission to drive the innovation in a certain direction. Addressing antimicrobial resistance, I didn't have time to cover the whole sort of voucher system as well as the prudent use type presentation, but certainly the voucher system is highly controversial. But if we get 10 exceptional antimicrobials developed in the next 10 years, maybe the cost, even if it's in the billions, is worth it, but that's a point for discussion. To boost regulatory support for the development of promising medicines, okay, we build on the PRIME scheme, etc., but also that platform scientific advice where we can bring many other players to the table. Hopefully that is achievable. To boost innovation and EU competitiveness through an efficient and simplified regulatory framework. And then finally, to make medicines more environmentally sustainable. And again, Chair, I didn't dwell very much on that, but there is, the Commission have a difficult job in making these proposals because the number of stakeholders now and maybe the awareness of the system is so much higher than it was 25 years ago. And we have to address all of these potentially competing demands, I think, in taking forward these proposals. So I think the direction of travel, at least with this proposal, is relatively clear. Whether then we build a system that achieves these objective deliveries, I think only time will tell in the years to come. And with that, Chair, thank you very much for allowing me the time to present my perspective on this challenge. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think you answered the question.
Yeah.
So yeah, you did a good job. Thanks. So I think that in the interest of time and to have a global approach and a global discussion, we decided to have question for Tony afterwards during the discussion time. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone that you may barely know or I've seen like sporadically, Juan, my co-chair, that will explain us the importance of stakeholder engagement to support implementation of the European Medicine Agency network strategy. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And I will try to elaborate and complement to Tony's. I think is an excellent presentation, which I think has covered all the priorities and how this group can support. But I will try to elaborate a little bit on the important on stakeholder engagement in supporting all these priorities. And I didn't want to mention before because I didn't want to spoil perhaps Tony's presentation, but actually the proposal for the legislation is proposing to streamline the system, simplifying the number of committees, and on one hand, at the same time, is giving a legal mandate for this group to exist. So in a way, I think it's another proof of the value of the discussions and the work that the group does, and also of the value of stakeholder input in regulatory activities in general. So I will try to elaborate on this basis. And I think when we think of the added value of regulators and specifically looking at healthcare professionals, based on the way that we have tried to implement this, we are looking at this multidisciplinary engagement. And we all agree healthcare professionals provide a very valuable contribution to the work. I think nobody questions this now. There has been, as we said, a lot of difficulties until we have connected everything. But I think now it's more acknowledged. And something which came up this morning as well is that, this morning earlier, this afternoon, is that we approach that in a multidisciplinary manner, where we have the primary care, the therapeutic area specialties, the community and the hospital pharmacies, the nurses. And I think this has a value that maybe we need to ensure is preserved and is properly represented. And I think I can see the text of the proposal and the legislation reflecting this aspect. The input that is to be provided will cover all areas. And I think we have to acknowledge that maybe discussions in this group are specific, discussions more on product specific are in other areas. So we will go from detailed scientific or clinical care input to strategic or policy discussions. And then we cover scientific assessment, communications, because communications is an important aspect, as well as policy and strategic topics. And we have to really distinguish these levels, because that's a little bit the focus of different groups that all together give the full input to all regulatory activities. An important aspect is the engagement at the interface with innovation. And here we need to continue exploring opportunities for engagement with healthcare professionals in the interface of both clinical research and clinical practice. And this, we have seen examples, and we have heard which are the priorities for many of you, covering clinical trials, personalized medicines, real-world evidence. And a good example of this is the work, for example, in the Innovation Task Force, where developers they can discuss scientific, legal, or regulatory aspects with other stakeholders. And I think this brings a little bit the outcome that we all expect. So how we want to maybe step up the engagement with healthcare professionals, and which is the value of eligible organizations? Because also looking at the text of the legislation, we are asked to have a very balanced representation, and we need to ensure that, for example, aspects of learning and sharing knowledge, we are able to have bilateral meetings, information loops. We need to ensure that this is properly implemented. But then the eligible organizations and the discussions with organizations help us a lot to map expectations and also identify gaps and act where is needed. And this, we use different tools, and we sometimes use surveys, but sometimes then even the discussions at this working party are not enough, and we have dedicated discussions such as the ones at the Healthcare Professionals Policy Offers Group. But then, of course, the working party, which is maybe one of the main instruments and the mechanisms to ensure that we can really map these expectations and gap identification. In order to increase impact, we need to have discussions where we can sometimes co-develop actions all together, and even more and more we use these topic-driven multi-stakeholder platforms, such as, for example, the recent workshop on shortages, or the one we had last week on clinical trials, which are so important because we sit everybody on the table, and we sit not only healthcare professionals, but in dialogue with all the actors, HTA's bodies, with industry, with academics, etc. And then we need to consider that it's important continuing allowing training and participation in external events, and even integrating more the work that healthcare professionals do in our activities, fully regulatory, but even sometimes you go to conference and meetings where you deliver a little bit the messages of the recommendations which are given here at the agency in the different committees. And finally, the element of awareness, which is so important, and that Uli highlighted this morning, how important it is to ensure that academics understands the work that we do and the importance of this work. And then any materials, any tools can be used for this purpose. Our strategic plan is trying to integrate as much as possible this multi-stakeholder engagement by design. And this is highlighted very much, and is the spirit to support the strategy of the network to 2025. Stakeholder engagement is highlighted as a key enabler of all the priorities. And it's not only an enabler, it's a prerequisite, it's an imperative in order to ensure that we are able to implement them. Many stakeholders are impacted by the scientific advance and by the changes that affect the network and all the work which is coming in the next years. And here we mention, as Tony has said, all the strategies, the regulatory strategy, the network strategy, but also we have been shaped completely by the crisis of the pandemic, but also the extended mandate, where we more and more talk about shortages, as we have said before, and then now all the new proposals in the new pharmaceutical legislation. So our idea is that what we want to do is that we want to improve, to optimize the service that we have to provide as an agency in improving and in managing human health, systematically integrating the multi-stakeholder engagement by design from the beginning in as many activities as possible, and including in activities and in strategic priorities. So why multi-stakeholder engagement? Because we believe is a better way. We believe that engaging all stakeholders simultaneously offers advance and benefits. We achieve a common understanding, and we are able to address together needs and potential issues or bottlenecks. Doing that together, it makes everything more efficient, and our experience is definitely to support as much as it is possible this way of working. It will improve the work, the regulatory work, with a clinical practice perspective, but taking into account also the viewpoint of other stakeholders. And then it fosters a lot of transparency and collaboration and even trust between the different stakeholders, and it makes everything much easier. Where possible, we try to integrate this as early as possible. And we have to acknowledge that it's not only multi-stakeholder, and we have to acknowledge, as the case as is happening now, we need to keep some space to maintain bilateral discussions, because this is important in some situations. And this needs to be introduced in order to be complementary and in order to achieve the best possible result. So this just to illustrate again and to go through which are the public health priorities, which are both highlighted in the regulatory network strategy and the regulatory science strategy. And these remain valid, but at the same time, we need to highlight, as it has been said, that the speed of change has never been faster, and that we need to really build a system which is able to adapt to this dynamic environment, because nothing is static anymore. And I think maybe we'll need to be totally open to change the way we work. And we have already changed during the pandemic, and as a consequence, this meeting, which is supposed to be almost physical, is still hybrid. And I think this is the reality we are living, but it affects all the way of working, on the way that clinical trials are designed and assessed, and etc. Everything needs to be looked with this changing perspective, because we cannot really be certain how the future in 5 years' time will be. So just to finalize, I think we need to build on this element of multidisciplinary expertise. This definitely shouldn't change, including all healthcare professionals, which covers doctors, pharmacists, nurses, and then provide the perspective of clinical care, scientific input, and also strategic and policy. You are also a tool and a way to get access to the best possible expertise, independent expertise. That's something which is not given for granted, and we need to ensure that we have mechanisms to provide these experts very fast, because the needs are really constant in different discussions. Now, for example, we are incorporating medical devices as well. So this needs to be directly coming from clinical practice and be also incorporate the real world experience. And that's important to cover all the spectrum of healthcare, from primary, secondary to tertiary. And then incorporate that into our work to drug development, benefit risk evaluation, and then safety monitoring. Communication remains a priority, is more important than ever. This has been demonstrated fully during the pandemic, and we need to ensure that you can help us to be able to provide an efficient and targeted communication, which is able to combat these elements of misinformation, etc., which are so necessary to build a system which can be trusted. And then to maintain this innovative landscape, which requires the integration of this multi-stakeholder engagement by design that we would approach and we would propose to implement, which will be able to provide this interface of clinical research and clinical practice and integrate it into areas such as clinical trials, personalized medicine, artificial intelligence, real-world evidence, etc. And finally, the element of enhancing understanding, which we have seen. So hopefully these are the elements in which we would like to progress in the future. And I think we're now open for discussion. I would like to thank all the work that Rosa González Quevedo has put on these reflections, which hopefully will be integrated into a strategic plan for the coming years. And thank you again, and happy to discuss now on the discussion.